Hello, Sons of Rust. Welcome to another Space Wolf video. Now, obviously, I am mainly on the Tau train for like my channel and everything else, but I've got to say, Space Wolves have been quickly becoming one of my favorite factions to play, even though I've had a short run on them. Now, I'm making this video because I just had a run at an 80-player GT where my list went undefeated, and I was the best in faction for Space Wolves at that event. It was a lot of fun. There was a lot of tech that I went into, and for someone coming from being very good at their main faction and having a good grasp of the game, Space Wolves gave me a lot to sink my teeth into. With a little bit of skill expression and using the things that they have in very, very different ways than what I was used to. And I thought it'd be good to make a video talking about the event, talking about my matchups, and a few little tech pieces that I used and decisions that factored into what I used in the list and what I didn't, and how I set those up for success. So let's get into it. I just want to say, first and foremost, I know that I'm sitting here in a, Tau merch shirt, which, by the way, pantherstudios.com.au, check them out. You can get one for yourself. We are working on Space Wolves shirts, but I just don't have them at the moment. So, forgive me for being a filthy trader. We'll sort it out, I promise. Okay, so the event that we are talking about is CruitCon 2024.
I want to give a shout out to CruitCon real quick, just for the results that they had this weekend. They actually had a 4-way draw for first place, 4 EXO and 1 results.
An event that my TO partner Alex ran, and I supported with terrain and a few other things. And that is me just there. Also good to have Richard on his Death Guard do very, very well. 2 Panther members in the top 4 is really, really cool. Now, one thing that I do want to say, there was a little bit of drama at this event. I am not going to get into it because it's not in scope for this video. But one thing that I will say is when I'm going through everything, I likely would have gotten a 5-0 if not for that drama. So, when I say that my list is undefeated, yes, I have a draw. Technically, I wasn't defeated. I drew. So I got you on a technicality. Get wrecked. But I just wanted to preface by saying that I am very, very confident that without that drama in round 4, I would have gone on to a 5-0 finish. And honestly, even if I went a 4-1, I would have preferred that to being embroiled in an unpleasant situation. But like I said, that's all I'll talk about. So with that said, let me take you through the list and let me show you what it is that I was running. Okay, so here we are at the list. You can see that we've got Logan Grimnar and Stormrider. When I was first learning the faction, I really slept on what this guy's power could be. For 180 points, he is an absolute steal. Being able to call everybody was calling it a Wolfie War, but I never participated in that. I would just say, ho, 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 motherfuckers, Santa Claus is coming to town. But obviously that's not as catchy, it's not as short. But Wolfie War, everybody gets to reroll charges and everybody gets rerolls hits in the fight phase, is a very, very, very powerful ability to turn on at the right time. Now, obviously, the thing that I did, you can see off to the right of him is his Thunderwolf Battle Leader with Hunter's Instincts for 10 points. I cannot believe that this enhancement is 10 points, but counting the battle round as one higher means that you can Strategic Reserve walk onto the board turn 1, you can Rapid Ingress at the end of your opponent's movement phase turn 1 if they go first, and from turn 2 onwards, you can walk into their deployment zone, which is incredibly powerful. Incredibly powerful. I then had a Wolflord on Thunderwolf with Fury of the Storm and Twin Lightning Claws. Now, what this means is that at all times, he has +1 strength, -1 AP on his weapons, and on the charge, he goes to +2 strength and -4 AP. -2 AP. Now, when you look at that stat line on its own, it's not quite so ridiculous, but then when you start considering that in a Thunderwolf Cav unit with a battle leader, you've got lethal hits on all the time. The +1 to advance and charge and using a strat is very, very nice, and I'll get into that when I start talking about some of the tech. But having Strength 7, AP 4 Lightning Claws that are also damage 2, because don't forget they're on a Thunderwolf Cav unit, you are hitting on 2s. If you've either got the Wolfie War or you've Oath of Momented the right target, you're re-rolling hits, then you've got Twin Linked on the Lightning Claws, and unless you're going into something with an invuln save, AP4 is pretty nasty, and that's on 7 attacks. That has a damage ceiling of 14 damage, which is almost any vehicle in the game dead. Now, obviously, you're not expecting to one-shot vehicles or big monsters, but that is a non-negligible amount of damage that your opponent has to worry about. And on top of that, The lethal hits and the +1 damage go away if he's not leading a unit, but there were plenty of times that I just had my Wolf Lords and my Battle Leaders running around after the Thunderwolf Cav unit had been killed, and you charge into people, and even with that damage 1, AP4, he was just picking up squads of guardsmen and that sort of stuff. It's just really, really good volume of attacks that have a lot of layering buffs, which are quite nice. Not only that, if you spend a CP to give reroll charges and lance, then it is just, it's really good. You're wounding most things on 4. Hey everyone, Jay from the future. I'm just editing the video here, and I realized at this point I forgot something which is really, really key, that your wolf that the Wolf Lord is riding also gets the Fury of the Storm, because it's not counted as a separate entity. It is just another set of melee weapons that are on the unit that you've put this enhancement on. Now, there are some people that have misunderstood the extra attacks. You can't increase the number of attacks that they've got, but you absolutely can increase their strength and their AP and everything else. So that means that not only is your guy with the lightning claws hitting extremely hard, the wolf underneath is strength 7 and AP 3. Damage 2 if it's still in a Thunderwolf Cav unit that's just charged. That is a very non-negligible amount of damage. Just thought I'd throw that in because that is a relevant and key piece of information for why this combination is so big on my priority list. You're winning most things on 4s with full rerolls, which we know mathematically means that you have a 75% chance of getting those through. So obviously, Stormlance Detachment, it just gives us so much. I do want to get some play in on the Champions of Russ, but Stormlance always having advance and fallback and charge, especially for Thunderwolf Cav bricks, is kind of mandatory. Not having that is particularly bad. I can see the Champions of Russ lists that have been doing quite well. They don't leverage the Thunderwolf Cav bricks, but I'll be honest, the thing that I've always loved about Space Wolves is the Thunderwolf Cav. I love unique units, which is why, even though I love, like, say, for example, the Salamanders chapter, they don't have anything unique. They're just a different flavor of them recolored, which just doesn't do anything for me. I'm a fancy bitch. What can I say? Then we've got another Wolf Lord on Thunderwolf, Thunderhammer and Shield. There's nothing particularly special about that. Thunderhammers are just amazing for the devastating wounds, especially getting +1 damage. 3 damage devastating wounds is non-negligible as well. Same for the Thunderwolf Battle Leaders. Nobody else has any enhancements because I couldn't fit in for the points. But one thing that I do want to highlight is the Librarian in Phobos armor, which him and the unit that I attached him to, the Infiltrators, easily got me almost 100 points throughout the game in terms of primary and secondary with a non-interactable unit that tripped up Hypercrypt Necrons, it tripped up demons. It was also why I mentioned earlier in the video I would have gone 5-0. It's why I was confident that I would also disrupt the person I would have had to play if I went into the last round undefeated without a draw. Now, that's not to say that I was guaranteed to win it, but just this tech piece for units that require close deep strikes, Grey Knights are a perfect example. Even Tau, there's a lot of retaliation Carter, which is going around at the moment, and they have 3-inch deep strikes or wanting to drop things in and disrupt your backfield. I had one unit, a 170 point commitment, but I had the entirety of my backfield screened out. I'll show you on TTS when we swap over it how much ground these things actually deny in terms of deep strike. But obviously the combo is Librarian and Phobos. He attaches to a unit. That unit cannot be targeted outside of 12, and enemies from the Infiltrator datasheet cannot deep strike within 12 of this unit. So that basically means that unless you can walk up to them, you're not shooting them and you're not interacting with them. And this also means that units that rely on dropping down, shooting, and then being able to do a scoot, like Adeptus Sororitas, are unable to do so. You are not able to activate those abilities if you are not able to shoot. The only exception that I know of is Eldari, which just says at the end of the shooting phase, make a move, which is fine. Moving on from the characters, I just had a 5-man Assault Incester unit. These guys are just a power fist, a little bit of shooting that I barely cared about, but the big thing is the mortals on the charge. They have a very, very good way of moving quickly because the 12-inch with flying isn't something that anybody else in the list has. So you can kind of use them as this tactical scalpel to go in and hit somebody. There'd be a lot of rounds where I would have 2 plans in mind. And I even said this sometimes to my opponent, I'm going to roll for an advance If I get a massive one, I'm going to full send it because I can touch this unit. If I don't, then cool, they're just going to stage in behind this building. And wouldn't you know it, I hit that 6 more often than I would like to admit. And they went in and they bad touched a bunch of stuff. You're not expecting them to just kill whatever they touch, but that's not the point of them. They're very, very fast and they're blocking up your opponent's movement or tagging things that they don't want you to tag. And it gives you so much freedom of the board to let this Wolf Jail archetype do what it needs to do. The Infiltrated Squad didn't do anything fancy with them. Obviously took the things that give them like the Feel No Pain or whatever else, but I'll be honest, I didn't use it once. Nobody interacted with the Infiltrated Squad. Literally nobody. Because Wolf Jail doesn't let people just walk up to them, so as long as you position them correctly, they're not doing what they want to do, which is really, really powerful. I don't see a world where I ever take those out of the list because it was just incredible. I had 2 units of scouts. Now, this was after the nerfs that we copped to the Thunderwolf Cav and the Wolfen, which happened right as I was getting the list together. So originally I was going to be running 30 Wolfen, but obviously they copped a point hike. And the concession that I made was to pull a unit of 10 Wolfen and add in a scout squad. Now, I'm really glad that I did that because the Wolfen being OC0 means that they just, they're a great hammer or anvil for you to slam somebody on or block somebody up. They were clutch as in the Wolf Mirror, where we were both going to do the same thing, but I was able to string Wolfen models out in front of my Thunderwolf Cav, so it meant my opponent, and he didn't realize to do this until he saw me doing it, and did it with his last unit of them. But Wolfen, you can charge into me, I'm going to fight on death, but the big downside of them is that OC0 means that you are not interacting with scoring or objectives or anything else. And having the scout squads, one of the things that made me very uncomfortable when I was learning Index Sisters was that they didn't have infiltrators to use that you wanted to jam into a list. So not having that, especially coming from Tau, where infiltrate and scout is everywhere. It's what Tau does, I think, better than almost any other faction. It gives so much breathing room, and the biggest counterplay to a Stormlance Wolf Jail list is that people lock up your movement so your units can't move where they want. Now, if you've got 2 scout squads and your opponent doesn't know to do that or is too late on the uptake, you basically just get to open up these channels for your Thunderwolf Cav to run through without any problem whatsoever, because don't forget, we can move through our own models. As long as you don't land on the base where you have to stop, then you're fine. Went for the missile launcher, went for the scout sniper rifle, but honestly, they didn't do a lot of shooting. These guys just did their infiltrate, did their scout moves. I'll show you when we go to TTS how I position them and use them. But really what they did is just get me a metric ton of points across the course of the game. And that's really what you want a unit like this for. Not every unit needs to be damaged. You do need to have utility and scoring within a list, even one as powerful as this. The main event of the list, the 18 Thunderwolf Cav split up into 3 units of 6. Storm shields on them because 4-up invulnerable saves make them just so tanky. Pair that with the Stormland stratagem for -1 to hit, -1 to wound and shooting. Armor of Contempt. It just makes it so this is such an oppressive unit. And there were so many games. Because I was going into this was my first major event with this faction. I won an RTT previous to that, and I was getting a lot of rep games in, but having a unit like these guys hit just about as hard as Tau at, Tau does at range, obviously, but whatever we touch, we are doing a lot of damage to. But with Tau, if they get any sort of clapback, you just die. They're paper units. Having a unit that could hit that hard and then take a hit in return was such a refreshing change of pace. And it's one of the things that made me fall in love with this list, where people weren't guaranteed to pick up a unit just because they could see it or get in range of it. You really had to work for it. And if I used my CP correctly, there's a good chance that you weren't killing them because you were -1 to hit, -1 to wound, and your AP1 guns just go to AP0. There's a lot of AP1 melee attacks, which I would just be saving on 3s. So there's a lot that you can do to keep a unit alive, and there is so much flexibility, which I really loved, for speed, for damage, for defensiveness. It just played into everything that I love running in a list. And then the Wolf, and I've already spoken about this, the Stormfrag auto launchers are actually fantastic. It's something that your opponents really have to respect, and even on Overwatch, you can get through quite a few wounds because you're just shooting so much blast. Like, for example, if Kroot tried to Kroot jail you, you can overwatch one of those units. You're already hitting on 6s. And if you've got Oath of Moment on them for whatever reason, all the better. But getting through those rerolls and a couple of wounds turns a Crute unit down to an acceptable level. And there's also something they have to worry about. A lot of players with these large units will actually string them out quite far to try and move block you, not realizing that if you kill one model, it breaks the two models within 2 inches of each other, and then they have to start killing off. So one death actually turns into like 4 or 5 models killed in order to get back to only having one within 2, which is not something that a lot of people seem to have considered and is a really, really important thing for us to keep in mind. The Wolfenhammers, the Storm Shields, 4-up invuln, 6-up feel no pain, 2 wounds, T5. It's just a rich tapestry of something that I don't mind somebody getting a line of sight on, because if they're shooting at them and not shooting at the Thunderwolf Cav, then that's great. The other big thing to talk about is the reactive move as a CP for any unit in your army, and then the Blood Surge for the Thunderwolf Cav. I caught so many people out with that, even though I warned them about both of those things when they started their movement phase. I cannot count the number of times I said, hey man, just bear in mind, CP, 6 inches, can go any direction, but I cannot land within engagement. Shoot at the Thunderwolf Cav units, and I can go D6 ending in combat. Every single time I reminded people. But it's still something that even when they know that you can do it, there are some times where I was able to put people in no-win situations where they couldn't move where they needed to go, or they needed to get damage down, or they just let me run at them next turn. But then look at that, I get to just tag into you. It's such a powerful ability. It's so oppressive. And I went into the current rank 1 in Australia Tau player, Kirby, in the last round, and we were both talking about it. We both agreed that we don't think Space Wolves versus Tau is a winnable matchup for Tau. Maybe there's a retaliation card Alyssa can do it because your vehicles can still shoot in combat. But the second they line up a bunch of guns to shoot at somebody, they shoot with their first unit, then you tag a unit in combat, nobody else is shooting at them because they're not vehicles or monsters, which means nobody else can shoot in combat. The only thing that can is a vehicle that just got engaged is from Big Guns Never Tire, able to shoot into them. So that's the list, 1995 points. It was incredibly powerful. Now, one thing I want to point out, I had somebody mention that, well, you know, if you like the Lightning Claws, why not just take Canis Wolfborn, I think his name is, get the sustained hits, all that sort of stuff. I actually, after playing this out and having the success that I did with it, I really stand by the 2 Wolf Lords. And I know that there are a couple of different ways of people thinking about this. Battle Leaders are non-negotiable. You need those. Lethal hits on those units mean that you go into the Knight, Chaos Knight, big vehicles, Monster Mash, anything like that, and you are not worried because you're getting through a ton of wounds in the hit phase. Being able to ignore a phase entirely is supremely powerful. But one of the big things is that with the change that GW made to how we reduce CP costs, our Wolf Lords, because they have a captain ability, 1 captain from your army per battle round can, it used to be, use a battle tactic for free and one that another unit has already used. Now, after the last FAQ, it is just any stratagem, doesn't have to be a battle tactic. You can't replicate unless the ability states the name of the stratagem you're using in the text. Perfect example of that is a Frailstone and Kaiganel from Sisters are able to use Heroic Intervention for 0 CP, even if somebody's already used it. They are not affected by the change to all of this because it is named specifically in the ability. But one of the things that I actually think was a net uptick for this sort of list archetype and why it felt so powerful is that we can now turn 1 auto advance 19 inches and still be eligible to charge. A Thunderwolf Cav unit going 19 and then somebody having to worry about a charge after that with +1 to charge. Now, bear in mind, I did have somebody get mistaken. You don't go 20 with a Wolf Lord. The ability specifically states add 1 to advance and charge rolls. Add 1 to rolls. Now, this is something that actually got addressed, I believe, in the rules commentary, where modifying something, if you substitute a flat value, you do not get to add modifiers to the roll because you haven't rolled for anything. So, but 19 still is an enormous distance to go. It's the 10-inch move plus the 9-inch auto advance. And being able to do that for 1 CP is really powerful because before, turn 1, you weren't doing that. You were setting up or potentially having your opponent have to move out and get in range of you. It really favored going second. But now, I can go 19 inches and tag almost anywhere in your deployment zone unless you're right at the back of your deployment zone, and that's really bad for you. You don't want to give up that much room. And so if your opponent wants to hang out at the back of the board, cool. You are having the easiest game of your life. And if not, I am tagging you with something that wants to tag you. Now, the reason I'm saying I stand by the 2 Wolf Lords is that on a lot of different deployment maps, you've got really 2 channels to be able to run through. And that means that it dictates where you're going to deploy your Thunderwolf Cav because they're such massive bases with 8 of them in a unit that must maintain coherency, must consider how they're going to move, and they have to move around walls. You can't just ignore them because they're not infantry or beasts and swarms or whatever. So it means that you've got these 2 different channels, and let's say your opponent wins Defender and they have infiltrators. They put down one of their units in one of those channels. You go, okay, cool. My other unit's got to go 19 down the channel that I'm able to protect. The other unit is just going to play a little bit more conservative, and then Santa can show up somewhere and slam somebody from a 9-inch deep strike. Then it doesn't matter that that 3rd Thunderwolf Cav unit didn't get in that turn. You don't need to full send everything that you've got because that's probably overcommitting your resources, and you want a fresh full health unit to, after your opponent has to trade back with everything's in their face, just slam it into them again and redo what the last 1, 2, or 3 turns were, maintaining primary objectives, having them for secondaries if you need, and then additional damage later on in the game. And speaking of base sizes, there's a lot of instances where you don't even get all of the models that you want in. Think about in terms of if you can't go through walls, there's only so many places that models are able to stop. And if you're on a barren board, obviously everybody can get in and everybody can fight. But there were a lot of instances where I would only have 4 models from a unit fighting. But the biggest thing that happened was that I tagged them up, I got damage off, and then in the clapback, if I made my invulnerable saves or they weren't able to get good wounds on a T6 target, it meant that that unit just existed for another turn and was able to do it all over again. All right, so let's have a look at the event for me. CrewCon 2024, it says 4.5 wins. It's 5-0, baby. Battle points 386. Now, I'll go through why this kind of happened to me because I did have round 3, a bit of a head scratcher happen. But you can see my opponent game win percentage was 61%, so I didn't have a bunny run by any means. I was going into people that were still winning a lot of their other games. And yeah, so round 1 against Oscar Dyer, this was on Chaos Demons. He had a very, very good list. We had a great game. I've been wanting to play Oscar for a very, very long time. Really, really great dude. Another veteran like me. And yeah, just basically this game was over from a perspective of me touching him early because I got first. He didn't have any infiltrators to stop me. He did have Nurglings to be able to try and stop me, but I got Defender as well, which meant that those Nurglings didn't go down where they needed to, and so he just had to use them to debuff with the -1 to hit. All right, so this one was an 80-73. We did start to run out of time, and we had to talk out basically up to turn 5, and I agreed to do that because genuinely I thought Oscar had me. He was playing a really good game. He was going to score a lot at the end of the game. But importantly, and what led to my victory, was that I just dominated primary for the entire game, and I was able to get through a good few secondaries. But obviously it's not a max score win, but that's not something that I really expected on this list. This list is going to tie people up and it's going to win, but it's not like my Tau list where I can get shitloads of damage. I'm able to score every single secondary because I've just got a bunch of MSU units. It's a very different archetype of play, but it's very comfortable in a lot of ways. It is something, and I do want to say this right now, I will never play this faction again, not on the clock. And I had across the course of this entire event, basically every single game go to time except for Kirby at the end. But it wasn't because of me. I basically took my turn and then sat there and watched my opponent succumb to decision-making paralysis. And not saying that in like a shitty way, but it's a list that jams everything in your opponent's face. They have to be very careful about what they shoot, very careful about where they move, very careful about who they fight and who they engage and how they're going to get primary and all that sort of stuff. And if they don't have a ton of flying units, they're not flying over your head. So there's a ton of pressure. It's basically what the list archetype is. And there are only 2 players that dealt with that decision paralysis well. But I did notice that there were a lot of instances of games going to time. And unfortunately, for the first 3 rounds, I didn't put my opponents on the clock, which I really should have. So I will never do that again because I know that I was taking my turns in a quick fashion. There's like 5 units to move, and I'm used to Tau, where shooting phase takes 1 billion years, and you've got to be very careful in your move phase in order to not give up the game because you're paper in return. But anyway, so it's just something when you're going from like a competitive perspective. If Wolves is something that you want to play, make sure you clock your opponents. But Oscar, it was a lovely game. Absolutely enjoyed playing him and a good first round win. Second round went into Nathan Bugman. Now, Nathan's a good friend of mine, and we actually, for the amount of time that we've been playing in tournaments and on the same team and all this other sort of stuff, Nathan and I have never actually played each other at an event. So we were really excited. He was like, I'm nervous as fuck because I don't know what your list does, but I've heard it's really, really bad. As in, he was saying that it's bad for him. But we had a really, really good game, and he was the first person to deal with the decision paralysis. And it wasn't because he was just cool as a cucumber. He was nervous and shitting bricks. But what he would do when he couldn't make a decision was just pick up a dice and go, fuck it, on a 4-up, I shoot you. And just threw it. And I thought it was the most Giga Chad move ever, which was really, really cool. Now, obviously, Hypercrypt Necrons, again, I just dominated the primary, and he was able to claw back a little bit at the end. But I just jumped out to too far a lead right at the start. And it meant that later on, even though he was getting good damage on me, and he was able to go to places where my units couldn't follow and kill them, I had the Infiltrator Squad, which meant that wherever they were, he couldn't interact with. And that just meant that I just kept getting primary, kept getting secondary. And I had a unit of scouts tie up a monolith for 2 turns, which was huge. And then I basically just ignored the monolith for the rest of the game, just kept throwing Wolfen at it and then a Wolf Squad and all that sort of stuff. And it just meant that I had enough tools to be able to deal with him, and I made sure that I tagged him in combat because they can't pick up their units at the end of their turn to do the Hypercrypt shenanigans. Now, obviously, the Monolith can pull other units on his turn back into the Monolith and then redeploy them from anywhere on the board. I shit you not, anywhere on the board, out of combat even. But having said that, everything with Necrons, funnily enough, died whenever I touched it. And there was a lot of stuff that was left alive that he really just didn't want to pull out of combat because they were up at a position in the board where if that unit that they were in combat with died in return, if they pulled out of there, they wouldn't be able to get back there easily to be able to score their primary or whatever. So yeah, really enjoyed playing Nathan. Really, I would happily play him again. Now, my round 3 was against Michael Higgs. I've played Michael before, and we had a lovely game. But you can see the scores 53-44. And this one was a head scratcher for me because we were playing, and I was playing at a quick level, and I should have put Michael on the clock. I really should have, but we were moving slow, and once the game ended, I was reminding him at like half hour and then at the 10-minute mark and everything else, hey, we need to start like hard talking out. But he never really, like, he just went back to taking his turn. I was like, okay, fair enough. When time went, I was like, okay, well, let's talk out, man. And he just said, oh, no, we're just going to leave it there. And I didn't really understand why. Not only had I been asking, hey, like, we're running behind, can we just like talk out the turns or whatever? I never stop somebody, like with Oscar in round 1. I don't like denying somebody, especially if I think they're going to beat me, honestly. I don't like denying somebody points because we spent too much time talking shit or one player was going too slow. And I ended this day just feeling like, all right, everybody's going on the clock. Everybody's going on the clock. And I don't understand why he just flat didn't want to. It's not to say that it's not within his right to say that he doesn't want to, because it absolutely is. The only time that I've really ever said, no, we're not talking out the rest of the game, when we've run out of time and we don't have a provable way of seeing who slowed who up, is when I just flat out don't like the person or they were being a dick. That's the only time where I'm sort of like, all right, you just made the last 3 hours for me absolutely insufferable. Why would I want to help you with giving you points and whatever else? So yeah, this one was, we were having a fun game. We were laughing. We were all that sort of stuff. And then we get to the end of it and it's just not going to talk it out. Especially when I was saying like, hey, can we start speeding this up? Can we start talking out? Like we're running out of time. Can we whatever? It was just a head scratcher. And I don't resent him. I don't know why. And I think that's the biggest thing. I think maybe I should just reach out to him and ask him what the reasoning was for it. Because, something like this, we're at the point where there was nothing he could do in his turn to beat me. So it's not even like he was trying to do like, if we cut it right here, I win because I'm ahead. So that one was a weird one. And that, did put a little bit of a dampener on the rest of my day. And going into round 4, we get to what ended up being a wolf mirror. And this is where some of the drama occurred. And the long and short of it is that this other player put me on the clock. And I said, yep, fine, no problem. If somebody wants to put a clock into the game, it is absolutely their right to do so, and I will play to the clock. And I actually wanted to anyway, so when he was like, yep, cool, we're doing this, I was like, yep, fuck yeah, we are. Then he clocked out. And I had a minute left to take my turn 5, even though, I won't get into the drama stuff. There was some other stuff that came up during the game, but I probably should have had more time than that, but we left it on my time for certain bits and pieces. But then the argument starts and we don't resolve and I got forced into a draw. I was understandably unhappy with that. And that led to... I would have gone in. There would have been only 2 undefeated players, 2 4-0 players, which was me and Pete O'Neill. We would have played for first place. Everybody else had a bunch of draws, and I'll show that at the end, and I think I showed it at the start of the video. But then I went into Kirby, and this was exactly what I needed. Kirby is such a lovely dude. He was an absolute pleasure to play. We were having a laugh, and it really picked up what had been a horrible previous round for me. So I'm so grateful to Kirby for having a game that, like, we both kind of knew that it's a losing matchup for Tau. And bear in mind, this is the rank 1 Tau player in Australia at the moment. This is last year's captain of Team New South Wales. And talking about it, there was just really nothing that Tau can do because of, as I said before, the mix of the reactive move and the blood surge move. It's just extreme. So that ended up my tournament. Jordan McGregor took first place on Adeptus Sororitas, Bring Us a Flame. Chris Wright took Blood Angels. Chris is arguably one of the best players in Australia. Then Feud was on Death Guard for 3rd, and I came 4th there. Pete, unfortunately, with having a 4-0 run, takes 1 loss and then goes to 5th, which is something that I know that Alex was trying to put top cuts into the 5th round, but it just didn't work out. BCP has been having a ton of issues, and it just didn't work out. That would have stopped Pete from having this happen to him, but it's what BCP is. Okay, so let's talk about some of the things that I used to really use this list to the maximum. One of the first things was that Santa would go into strategic reserve. He did for every single game. There was no game where I felt like he should start on the board. And a big reason for that is that your deployment zone gets very gummed up very quickly. And I don't like having a lot of instances where my opponent has a ton of stuff to shoot at, or at least has their run of stuff to shoot at. And when we look at our deployments, there's only a few places that a Thunderwolf Cav unit is going to be able to exist without being a massive threat of just getting shot off the board. So, all right, so to that end, I'm just going to grab a unit of Thunderwolf Cav here, and realistically, what I would be deploying first, and let's do that. Let's do that. I've just adjusted the list because this was the old one before the points nerfs, but it would always be a scout unit to go down first. And now what I'd be looking at is... Obviously, it depends on your opponent, so don't take this as a, and all the time apply it to everything. This is, adjust as you play against different people, and understanding what they want to do, what their units can do is very important. One of the things that has always helped me win games is having an open dialogue with my opponent, asking them pertinent questions, advance and charge, advance and shoot. What have you got that can redeploy? Have you got any reactive moves? Like having those conversations with your opponent and trying to work out what they can do, because obviously obviously, this is a game played with perfect information. People can't withhold things if they're asked, but they don't have to tell you if you don't ask them, which, a lot of the best players, especially some of the guys that I play against very regularly, will remind you of stuff when you're going because they don't like having a gotcha moment, but there are plenty of people that will not offer that up. If you aren't asking the right questions, they won't tell you. So just make sure that that's part of your repertoire. You're always asking them about everything that they might be able to do and what their army does. So when I would look at it, and we look at a map like this, and Search and Destroy is kind of perfect because this map gets used, from what I've seen in a lot of GTs, at least once, maybe twice across the course of 2 days. And what you look at with this is that we have to consider we can't just go straight through here. That's perfect for Wolfen and Assault Incestors and all that sort of stuff. But there is 1 channel, 2 channels, 3 channels, 4 and 5, but 4 and 5 are a lot more situational. Because they're not going directly to your opponent's deployment zone, they're going outwards like this. So what I would look at, if my opponent got Defender and they put down an Infiltrator, let's say, for example, they put down a unit over here and they were like, I don't want you running through this channel. Okay, cool, no problem. Obviously, I'm not setting that up perfectly, but just they've strung out a unit across here. I would then go, okay, I've seen where your infiltrators are, and what I'm going to do is put down my unit of scouts. I want to make sure that you can't put anything down within 9 inches. So if I want to guarantee that this is opened up, what I might do is this. I would go wholly within 6 inches of the edge of this wall. So you can see I've set up the unit wholly within 6 inches of the wall, which means that I don't even have to measure. Me and my opponent have agreed that if I don't go first, I can always pop them back behind the wall. Now, there were some times where the scouts actually had to stay out here in the open. One of those was against the wolf opponent, where I needed to sacrifice a unit because he set up all of his units around like these little areas, and I got away with that because he was only running 1 unit of scouts. So once that unit went down, I didn't have to deploy the second one until I saw where the rest of his units went. But in this instance, let's say I'm playing against a shooting army like Ironstorm Marines or Tau or Eldari or something like that. I put them down like this. You can't put a unit down anywhere unless you're there. I can't get within 9 of this anyway, so the closest I'm going is here. But having this set up means that they're not stopping the middle, and they won't really want to put a unit just out here, because that means I can go through this channel or I can go through this channel depending on what they're doing. And then if I don't go first, the scout unit just moves back behind the wall, as I agreed with my opponent, and I don't really have to worry about anything else. So obviously I've moved them in perfectly, but every model is wholly within 6 of the wall. And now they're protected from any clapback. But that's what I would open with to protect myself against my opponent trying to block this off. If I got the first laydown of an infiltrator, then immediately what I would look at doing is having one of these channels open in the best way possible. And that might be that, given, like, looking at this, I can put a unit in here, and that is the shortest distance for me to get there. Now, the question becomes, based on who my opponent is, do I prize being able to go through there? Because if I grab, say, the Wolf Lord, now, I very rarely deployed this aggressively, but if I put a Wolf Lord here, and I go, okay, he moves up 8 inches to clear the crates there. He moves a further 6 to clear the building there. That's 14. He moves a further 1 to clear that building. I've got 4 left, and I can get into there and charge. How worth it for me is that? Whereas on this side, if I deploy there, I go, let's say 3 to clear the building, 7 to clear the crate, and then I've got 9 left. I'm also just in here. Both channels are really good, and this is what I was saying about having a Wolf Lord in each squad. They can't predict which channel I'm going to walk down. If they block up one channel, I just go, cool, this Wolf Lord's using the Auto Advance 19. It's incredibly powerful. So a final deployment would look a little bit something like this. All right, so this would be a completed deployment phase for me. Now, obviously, you look at it and you go, okay, well, just looks like you've plonked down a bunch of units, but I want to talk about some of the most important things. The first is that the scouts going up this way so they can go back behind that wall. The other variation that I would have on this is that they go like this. Again, wholly within 6 inches of the wall so they can pop back over there, but that would depend on what they've maybe got to come down here and shoot them down this angle. The last thing you want to do is give them up for no reason. Putting this unit down, this was if I won and I went defender, this would be my first laydown over here because it basically guarantees that this channel is going to be open because they don't want to put something down here that's just going to stand out in the open. And realistically, he can go to there, and that means you're going from there. So, a few of the most important things. The first is that the use of terrain on these guys, and I did this quite a bit. Visibility is on a model-by-model basis. If one model is visible, then you can see the whole unit. It's fine, but you get benefits of cover and that sort of stuff. You can't see every model in the unit, that sort of thing. But one of the most important things here, the Wolf Lord, you can see is not visible past this wall. You have to be on this side of the 3-story terrain to be able to see him there. From this channel, you cannot see him at all. The battle leader is not touching the terrain feature with his base. His wolf head is able to overhang it, but that is not the same as the base touching the terrain. What this means is that he is also not visible because you have to draw around the base because he is not touching it. Essentially, what I'm doing is leveraging the fact that the wall is protecting this guy so I can deploy a little bit more rather than having to deploy like this where I don't want anybody touching the terrain feature so nobody goes close. What I'm doing instead is leveraging the knowledge that it's model by model, and if you can't see the Wolf Lord past the wall, then you can't see him, and this guy is not on the terrain feature. Now, this one obviously a little bit further back because I don't want them to get shot down this way. The other thing you can see I've strung out a little bit like this, putting the most important characters at the front. Because again, as I said, when you start moving these units in realistic fashions, you may only be getting like 3 or 4 dudes in to be able to fight. Because you might have somebody there, when he touches in there, he touches there, he can't get into base to base. So you've got 5 people fighting, and this is a relatively open section of the board. So, I'll just chuck those guys back, but you saw where they were deployed. So that was a big thing when I was learning this army, was make sure your characters are generally at the point at which it's going to hit your opponent. And the reason for that is that they've got the Thunder Hammers. You want to make sure they're getting in because they are the most damage that you can get when they go through. Or the Lightning Claw guy spending a fight phase where he's not able to attack feels really, really bad. Then I've got behind the walls here the Assault Intercessors. Now, these guys, because they move so fast, at a minimum, with an advance, are going to here. But if I roll a max advance, 18 puts me up to here, which means they're almost going as fast as these Thunderwolf Cav, paying for an auto advance 19. Wolfen putting up against the wall because you just want to run straight through. And potentially with advances be able to, get a charge off onto the other side of the wall and lock people up. This one, I basically just said, if you go first, I'm fine with you shooting at them. I'm fine with you going after them because once all of the choice spots are taken, if they're going to be in the open anyway, I'm going to put them in an aggressive position. Now, against something like Tau that has a bunch of really effective weapons against them, it might be that they don't sit there because I'm confident my Thunderwolf Cav are going to be able to do what they need to do. And these guys are going to deploy back here because that means that they're safe. My opponent can't shoot down any of these channels. And I've got a second anvil to come down and lock my opponent up when they come forward to try and get primary. Now, an alternate deployment that I would do with these guys is to pull these Thunderwolf Cav back if I know that my opponent is going to go relatively quickly with his stuff and is going to try and get in my face. I would put the Wolf in here because they have to crash into them first and they make the best use of this terrain. And I don't think the rest fit, so you just go there and you just go there. Then what I would do is have the Wolf Lord here. And I actually had to do this in one of my games and it worked out very, very well. Again, you have it so the base isn't visible past this line. So he's not shootable. Then you have the battle leader. Again, characters at the forefront because they are the most important. And then you set up a conga line so that you've got 2 inches out this way. He goes like that, but still he's protected down this way. and set up the unit like this. Now, the reason I've done that, you can see I've still got 2 within 2. That line of sight is protected by that corner of the base. There is the tightest, tiniest little line to shoot at, and they will need to have 30-inch guns to be able to do it. So that really sets up that one unit will be able to shoot at them, but then that might just trigger a blood surge for you to go a little bit further on your turn and not actually have that many guns to be able to shoot down this way to get them. This is still perfectly legal from a coherency perspective. 2 within 2, then 2 within 2, and then these guys up there. Now, you might be thinking, oh, but the whole unit's not going to crash in when you charge. That's fine. With pile-ins, with Auto Advance 19, with all that sort of stuff, you get enough models in that you're fighting, and then these guys, you might not even need their damage, and when your opponent claps back, these are just the first to die. And that means you start maintaining your coherency even better. Again, the most damage you're going to get is from the characters. You don't need to get every single model into fight. Absolutely try and maximize getting models into fight. But it is not the end of the world if they don't get to. Again, these tight channels or tagging your opponent through a wall mean that not everybody's going to get to fight anyway. So the most important thing is that you are tagging your opponents, getting into combat and forcing some bad choices and fallback moves as opposed to advanced moves, or being able to move and perform an action to get points. Now, the other thing that I want to point out here, you can see how I've set up my infiltrator unit. These big purple circles are the infiltrator unit. I've got 12 inches marked off here. So there's a tiny little bit there. On my turn, I might move him back if there's a tiny little model that can fit in there, but most units aren't getting back in here. Now, when I look at how much ground I am covering off with these bubbles, it is 40 inches. 40 inches of deep strike denial off a 170-point unit between the 100-point infiltrators and the 70-point librarian. It is just insane. It's actually insane how much ground this covers off. And this is all uninteractive, by the way. Let me bring this up and I'll reiterate it. While this model's leading a unit, models in that unit have stealth, and that unit cannot be targeted by ranged attacks unless the attacking model is within 12. Then, the infiltrator ability, enemy units that are set up on the battlefield from reserves cannot be set up within 12 inches of this unit. Now, notice it says this unit. The librarian inherits that ability when he joins the squad, similar to lethal hits for the Thunderwolf Cav unit. Everybody gets those lethal hits. It's not just the Thunderwolf Cav models. So that is my list. That is how I set them up. There are a couple of games on the channel where I was playing the Thunderwolf Cav. A lot of them are learning games where I'm trying to wrap my head around it, so it's not the skill expression that I had at this GT, but it is sort of a good look at how I learned it. And even the first time I ever played the Wolves, I beat a decent Knight player without using the detachment rule, without using lethal hits, without using the +1 damage from the Thunderwolf Cav. Like, it just, the fundamentals of the game really are what make this list shine. Yes, there are a lot of the parts, the lethal hits, the damage, the invuln saves on a lot of the units, they are great. But if you play the fundamentals of the game well, you're going to see success with this. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you've been enjoying the Wolves and if you're going to keep going with it. I am definitely keen to see when we're going to get our codex. I hope that a lot of these shenanigans stay intact, but I also hope we get a lot more tools and fun things that we can do to add in new stuff and keep it fresh. Big thank you to all my patrons and YouTube members who keep the channel going. If you would like to join them, check out the links in the description. And make sure you do the internet things, liking and sharing and commenting and all that good stuff. It really helps with the algorithm. Or don't. I'm not your Wolf Lord. See you in the next one.